Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of the Hidden People commentary series for episode 1 of season 1. I'm Chris Burnside, lead writer and director and producer of the show. And joining me are...
Your voice is so soothing.
Oh, yes.
This is Jordan Lopez, producer and actress. I play Mackenna.
This is Sean Gunther. I am the storyteller.
Megan Burnside. I'm also an executive producer and director.
Cari Zahn, writer for season 1.
And Katharine Seaton, composer and sound designer.
Woo! Excellent. Well, thanks, everybody. So, a word of warning, we're going to be discussing spoilers for the series during this conversation and during all of the commentary episodes. So if you haven't heard the whole series, you should probably go listen to the whole series first and then come back and check out the commentary where we talk about the episodes and how we made them, give you some behind the scenes stuff and whatnot, and probably a lot of general silliness. This episode will be available to everyone, but the rest of the commentary series for all 22 episodes of season 1 will be available only to patrons on Patreon at the bonus audio level. So if you want to get the rest of the series and listen to a lot more of the silliness, then you should go on to Patreon at patreon.com/hiddenpeoplepodcast and join us there to get the bonus episodes that we've already released for the show, and then all of this commentary series as well as we wait for season 2. All right, so we're going to begin discussing episode 1 of the first season.
All right, well, this is Sean Gunther again. I play the narrator, and I'm the first voice you hear. And I kind of wanted to go over the differences between our audition pieces and where the characters actually ended up. I know from my audition piece was this very first scene, and I was surprised by how what I got from just the me script, and then at the end of production, it was significantly different. So,
In what ways was it different?
we started off. I started off reading that script like it was the voice on your shoulder, the conscience, not the good conscience, right? The little devil speaking and whispering into your ear, but. As we go along, I mean, first thing you find out it's a real character. It's just set up right there. First thing. I wasn't prepared for that. Thanks, Chris.
Everyone should have a small little Sean Gunther on their shoulder
Egging
at
you
all
on.
times.
I don't know that I want to
Criticizing you?
Yeah, always.
Really, it just be
Constantly criticizing you, maybe talking about your impending death.
or the people around you who are just not gonna make it.
Thanks, Sean. I love it.
Well, and what's interesting about that opening scene is that when you auditioned for it, it was only the storyteller's parts. Alder Neve not only wasn't in the script at the time, didn't exist in the show. We had only written, I think, the first half of season 1 when we did these early auditions for just the core characters, the series, the ones who would become the series regulars. And Alder Neve not only wasn't in the script, but didn't exist. We hadn't discussed Alder Neve, and it was only in writing episodes 11 and 12, the mid-season, that I kind of came up with Alder Neve and realized that we needed someone for the storyteller to talk to really sell the courtroom aspect of what was happening in that scene, even though most of what's happening in that scene is very vague and intentionally kind of obfuscated. But once we added Alder Neve, we went back and I actually rewrote that opening scene so that most of your parts are the same, but now it's a conversation. It's not just a monologue. And part of that was also that we had done a monologue with, we had opened Unwritten with a monologue, our previous show. And what we found is that some listeners were only listening to 1 minute of the show and then deciding that it was an audiobook and never listening to the rest of it to hear that we actually had a cast of over 30 people. But they just heard 1 minute and just said, oh, there's only one person that's ever going to talk, and they turned it off forever. So we decided that opening with another monologue might not have been the right call.
True. And it wasn't.
Yeah, and one other thing about the opening scene is the introduction of the sound effect to the voice. And I don't know who wants to talk about that, but
Please,
there was
me.
an effect that was put on.
You have words?
You have words?
We got a lot of listener feedback. Was it in reviews that we
Some
heard?
of
Yeah,
it
a couple
was.
of reviews.
A couple reviews of people saying, something wrong with my headphones? Does everyone hear that echo? Blah, 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 blah. So we added the warning. I mean, how long in did we add the warning? Was it a month after
I
we had
didn't even
released
know
it?
that warning was added in until I re-listened last night
Yeah.
to
Oh,
prepare
yeah.
for this.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is new.
We were like, well, we're going to put in
Yeah.
a warning real quick, just saying, hey, the effect is necessary. There's a reason for it, and it'll be shown in the mid-season finale as to why. Did you see a rise in our numbers at all? Or listener
Conversion.
numbers lasted longer?
Well, we have gotten better conversion as we've gone along through the season. I don't know, like from episode 1 to episode 2. Historically, in podcasts, there is always a big drop between the first episode and the second episode. And we have seen that improve. I don't know if it's our message or not. We've seen less comments online about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone saying, there's something wrong with your microphones.
Right. Yeah, because we had that at the beginning. And I know I was on some Facebook message groups, and I'm like, no. Try this. Just listen past that. Listen past 5 minutes, and you'll hear the rest of the cast and what they sound like. It is intentional. But yeah, it's very interesting. But it is also, like, the sound effect itself was a pretty tedious process when we were first putting it out, right?
Yes.
Oh, we went through so many versions of so that sound effect, what we call it with the producers, we call it the hidden people accent. Before we even sat down to do the audio, we spent a long time figuring out, okay, well, what do the hidden people sound like? Do they have an accent? Since they're based on this sort of like English and Celtic and Norse mythology that we're sort of all mashing together, do they have an accent that's part of one of those regions? But we couldn't decide on one of those regions, for one thing. And for another thing, there was another reason why we didn't do, like, real world accents for the characters. I don't know. Jordan, do you want to weigh in on that?
Why is that, Jordan?
I mean, I'm
Why?
so good at accents.
Let's hear one right now.
Yeah. Let's pick one out.
Australian?
There's actually a good warning on the Discord. If anyone's not on it, you need to get on it, where I explain that my accents are so good, it'll blow your mind. So we tend to
Yeah.
save our listeners from having to listen to that, because I don't want to blow their
We don't want to
minds.
blow people's minds.
No,
Like, we don't
no,
want
no,
people
no,
to think
no.
this podcast is good.
Yeah. No, I'm not good at accents. But also, I imagine that it takes our auditioner pool down a little bit, right?
It totally does.
Trying to make sure we
Yes.
can get everybody that can get a decent accent that sounds similar, so we can all say they're from the same dialect.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm glad we didn't do that, because I wouldn't be here.
if we had done, like, say, everyone should have an Icelandic accent because that's where the phrase "the hidden people" comes from, that would have been really hard.
Yep.
And since the only cast member we had from day zero, really, before we even really knew what we were doing, was Jordan, we knew that we had to make it work. And so that was why we decided to not go with real world accents. You can't see I'm doing air quotes, but obviously you can't see that. But real world accents. So we wanted to come up with something else, and that's when we decided to do an actual effect on the voice that would be their accent. And that is why, for example, certain characters like Fack that grew up in Arcadia have that effect, even though she's human, because that's the accent that she picked up, and doesn't have the I guess Earth accent. So we went through a lot of variations of it.
So many.
We tried so many different versions, and most of them honestly sounded so cool, but were so obtrusive. And anyone talking for more than 2 sentences with that effect would just be so difficult to listen to. Even though it was really neat, it'd be like listening to the VOF all the time.
No, thank you.
Which the VOF is cool for those few lines, but like if everyone talked like that, like if the storyteller talked like that through the whole show, wow, that would be very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, but Dan Sievers, our audio engineer, is the one that helped us to come up with the accent. And I know he applied so many different effects, reverb. I don't even know all of the effects that he had, but it was a very interesting process. And we found out that applying that effect to men versus women was also very different. So the men, we oftentimes take them down a little bit deeper, but for the women, when we took them down deeper, it sounded really weird and really wrong. So what he did was he kind of tailored the effect to the person just to make it sound like they have an accent, but not take it too far.
For however many Hidden People characters we have, that's how many different, slightly nuanced vocal effects we have, because everyone has one that's kind of built for them.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Katie, from a sound standpoint, did the audio effects change your way of thinking? Did they change the way you had to do the effects?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I mean, because the accent that you chose and you ended up pitching them down, that sort of changes what goes on around them a little bit. Only when it gets really busy, in the scenes where there's a lot of action. You know, had I had Sean's voice given to me as it came out and then the effect was applied at the end during the mixing stage, that might have affected what I did, because I'd have tried to sort of make sure that the frequencies around that voice were sort of clear to allow him to come through. And then obviously if you're pitching it down, that might have messed up that process. So yeah, it does change it a little bit. It tends to, I mean, I'd done exactly what Dan did, in fact, to create that effect, but it kind of cuts through quite a lot, doesn't it? So it tends to be quite loud when the narrator's talking. So that makes a difference as well, because you have less room for the big bangs and stuff.
Did you end up having to do anything different for voices depending on like the setting they were in? Like we start off in the courtroom and then we go to the music shop. Does that also affect how you process voices?
Yeah, for sure. I tend to create spaces for each scene. And the very first thing I did actually was, in your opening monologue, create a big echoey courtroom space, which is where I imagined it was happening. And straight away Chris said, don't do that. There's already loads of reverb on it. It's too much. So that came off again. But yeah.
Also, Katie, prior to processing episode 1, you were playing around with different musical themes. So what was your thought process with that?
Oh, it's such a long time. It's a year ago now. So we had an initial conversation, and you were talking about drawing from traditional folk music from the places that you drew your folklore from. So Ireland and Scandinavia came up, and UK as well. And so, I mean, the first thing I did was just listen to sort of traditional music from those places and just come up with ideas that married those kinds of sounds with, you know, what I'd taken from the story, having read through the story. And then we had like a bit of to and fro, didn't we, where we sort of said, okay, no, it needs to be darker, and, you know, we need a little bit more modern for the opening section of the story, where it's all set basically in sort of modern urban place. So adapted to that. But I have to say, actually, most of those initial ideas did end up being used, more or less, I think, in the end, one way or another. I've ended up with about 15 or 16 different bits of musical material married to like themes and characters in the story. And, you know, most of what I do, not always, sometimes there's something which just has to be written from scratch, but most of what I do is drawing on that and using it to sort of express whatever the character or that thing in the story is doing at that time. Yeah.
Do you guys now, after working for a year together, do your ideas vibe quicker, or do you still have a back and forth?
I mean, I would have to say it normally feels like I know what you want. I suppose I got used to this, you know, what you're asking for, which is the idea, right? As a composer and sound designer, you have to try and get to know what is needed for any particular project. So I anticipate that.
So we're obviously coming at you from past the end of the season, and I wonder, as writers, we did a thing that I had previously heard about from Donald Sutherland, where he doesn't start a movie at the beginning of a movie. He prefers to start it somewhere in the middle, and then go back and shoot the beginning of his movies at the end, after everybody's got used to working together, everybody gelled, they sort of have established their relationships, and really any good stories about their relationship. So you guys chose to start your story in the music, the relationship stories, really, in the music shop. Was there impetus behind that, or just happened that way?
I think that, I have to really think back very far, because the bones of the Hidden People story, while we wrote the Hidden People in 2018, is that when we wrote it, or 17? We started in 17.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wrote a screenplay called Fetch, which is the basis of the entire story, in 2012, I think. So it actually begins with the murders, but which we actually end the first episode with the murders instead, and that one began with them. But otherwise, the first scene after that was the music shop. Now, the difference is that in that story, most of the characters were very different, and a lot of them didn't exist at all. Like Alfie didn't exist. There was a character named Nissa, but she wasn't like Nissa at all. Thomas did not exist. There was no sibling. So it was a much more stripped down version, but that began the music shop. And I think that's kind of why I started this one there, just out of, I don't know, familiarity with that. But talking about narratively, we want to go into the space that is the most comfortable for Mackenna, and before we rip her out of it. And that is the only space she's not comfortable at home at all, because of her family not being her real family and not being something she chose. So the music shop is at least a place that she chooses. She chose those people to be her friends. She chose to work there. Not that she really wants to work there, or even necessarily is the best friend in the world, but it's the closest thing to comfort in her life. And since we're about to rip her out of it, we need to see her comfortable for just a little bit. And we spend so much time in the first half of season 1 before we get to what the show really is, right? A fantasy adventure. Before we get to that, we spend so much time in the real world leading up to it. We didn't want to spend even more time showing her normal life, because we already spend so many hours in the real world, which once we leave it, we don't really go back. That we didn't want to drag it out too long. So that little bit, that little exchange, which is, we never have another exchange that comfortable in the rest of the show, where they're just goofing around and being silly about like movies and stuff. That was supposed to show this is what life has been like for 27 years, and it's all about to change.
I think a big part of that too, from a writing standpoint, like for me coming up with this story, the way we were going to tell it is, you know, I think in general, like with our DWM projects, we don't necessarily try to write the most likable main characters.
What?
But I do think, you know, for me, there needed to be something for you to latch onto to understand. Understand is probably a heavy word. I don't know that any of us really come to fully understand Mac, but at least see, like you were saying, a glimpse into her world. But, you know, I think even from episode 1, we're already kind of setting up this almost impossible case where, like, you think Mac killed her parents, and we don't have any kind of setup until the very end of the episode to suggest that there's any kind of otherworldly thing that could make that not possible. So I think having those sort of organic interactions between the characters and showing, like, there are people Mac cares about in whatever way she does that, really allows you to have at least some suspension of disbelief to continue to watch this story, or listen to this story. There's nothing you're watching except probably like your wall when you're sitting there listening to the story. I don't know what you do, but but I think that was really important, was to kind of set up some reason for you to keep listening instead of it being this kind of weird, like, why are we getting a glimpse into this murderer, and kind of giving you a space to believe that there's somewhere else the story can go.
some sense of normalcy.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So we ended up doing the first episode twice, right? Once at the beginning, once at the end.
We did, yeah. That was another thing we learned from Unwritten is that, I mean, if you record chronologically, which we sort of do, I mean, we definitely record each episode out of sequence individually, and we do sometimes record episodes entirely out of sequence. But we kind of chronologically go through it because when you're rehearsing, I think it's a lot easier to hear it, the story unfold in order, because from directing narratively, that side of directing, I'm thinking about things like, does the story flow? Is there a thing we forgot that maybe we knew, but we didn't actually say to the audience ever, and we won't notice it unless we hear the story unfold in real time chronologically. So we kind of go chronologically, but what that means is that we're going to end up with our best, most comfortable performances at the end. And the episode that the most people are going to hear, the one that's going to tell them whether they should listen to the show, is the first one. So we very intentionally re-recorded the first episode at the end. So we did it the first time, normally, and there are actually takes from that very first recording in the actual, like, released first episode. But we then went back in and re-recorded the first one to get, to try to get everybody really in their characters. They know exactly how they behave and whatnot. And I think we got, ultimately better performances that way.
We did. Mac was almost 100% different.
Yes.
That was probably the biggest thing.
It was easily the biggest.
Yeah. It just, I don't know, when we first did Mac, even from day zero, like you said, no one will understand her. I will never understand Mac. I'm still getting used to it. But Mac sounded more concerned when she found out that her parents were murdered. Whereas the new version, the version we released, she does not give a shit about it. But that was the whole point. That's what we wanted in the first place, but we didn't, at the time we didn't know that's what we wanted or what we needed. I talked about this at our finale party about having those levels of boring, doesn't care Mac to fighting badass Mac, and it only gets bigger in season 2, and that we wouldn't have those levels if we hadn't gone back and re-recorded.
Yeah, that it changed really dramatically.
Yeah.
The just level of apathy
I know, it's so bad.
Was ratcheted up so much.
I was listening to it. I was like, oh man, I forgot how bad it was. Just how blah. Just like, have you guys ever made a cake or cookies or baked at all, and then you forgot an ingredient so it never rose and it just is a pile of mush? That is Mac in episode 1. Well, like 1 through 4 almost. It's just bleh. It's the word for
So when
it.
people ask to describe Mac, I'm now going to say unrisen cake.
Yeah,
She's
just
unrisen
like,
cake.
if you could just bleh, that is Mac, early Mac.
No, I totally agree. I was listening to the first 2 again, and I found myself sort of getting angry at the lack of response.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm sure that's something you were going for.
Oh,
right?
it was entirely intentional
Yes.
because we want. Obviously, especially if you've listened along the way and you've listened every 2 weeks for 44 weeks to the show, you're probably going to forget how radically different Mac was at the beginning than how she is at the end. But if you go back and listen, it's a different person. And that was entirely intentional.
Yep.
It was intentional in the writing. It was intentional in Jordan's performance. And we really wanted a transformation because the story, especially at least in season 1, is about identity. It's about finding out who you are. It's about feeling like in your life, in your family, in your own skin, that you do not feel right. Something is off and you don't know what it is, but you feel like you're not the person that everybody else thinks you are and that everyone has told you are. And a lot of people experience that. For Mac, it's quite literal. She is quite literally not the person she thought she was, not part of her family. And she's representing that quest for identity. And when she finds it, at least when she thinks she finds it, it dramatically changes her. And of course, based on the things that happen throughout the series and especially in the finale, it's going to dramatically change her again. And going into season 2, we're going to see yet another kind of different Mac as she now really settles into, this is really, really who I am. And now I have this really strong sense of identity. The identity theme, it doesn't go away. Because I think it's expressed in different ways through different characters, but it's definitely less of a theme in season 2, which I think has themes more along the lines of responsibility and power. But you'll hear that when we get there.
I think too, it's interesting because there's so much behind whatever you want to call the unrisen cake, but like
the blub.
Yeah, the blub. But it's so not expressed through Mac, because I don't even think that she really knows that that's how she feels. Like, I don't think she can like understand that there's like a missing ingredient there, if we're going along with that metaphor.
No, it's sticking. We're definitely keeping it.
Yeah. But I think that's, because there's such a lack of explanation there that, like, we really get to see throughout the show. Like, in that first episode, I think it really also helps portray Thomas's character and is such a testament to his patience, because I would have taken her by the shoulders and shaken her and been like, our parents are dead, like, can you try to care a little? But he's just like, I forget if it's in episode 1 or 2, but he's like, everyone processes in their own way, and that's okay. Like, he's such a little golden retriever that he's just gonna be like,
it hurts me sometimes, especially listen back, like, Thomas, bruh, wake up. She is the worst person.
Yeah. But nobody's the worst person to Thomas. Like, especially not his sister. Not even, like, down the line when his sister is potentially not his sister, and then he may have more than one sister, and
she tries to murder him.
And he's like, but she's my sister.
If we didn't have Thomas, I don't think Mac would still be with the family.
Yeah.
She would have been left on a doorstep a long time
ago. Not just in a basement. Like, you're gone.
Yeah, goodbye. Yeah.
So that metaphor, the cake metaphor, we're going to need some fans to post the ingredients and do some research. It's going to have to be bitter. It's going to have to be sort of flat.
Does that explain the cake from episode 8?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Mac made her own personality right there. Bleh. It's funny you bring up Thomas. I was looking through my old scripts just to kind of get an idea of where my headspace was at. And I believe it's when we're in the car, or Thomas and Mac are in the car, and he's telling her, like, they were killed. And the line is, "This is ridiculous. I just saw them last night. I was at the house until this morning," which almost sounds like denial, right? What I wrote was unbelievable. Like, Thomas is a liar. Like, of all people, Thomas is definitely not a liar, but the line comes out like, you're an idiot.
Yeah. Like,
this is ridiculous.
Well, stupid. I saw them last night.
Yeah.
Well, stupid. It's been almost 24 hours. They're dead. Like, yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite scenes in this episode, just from a sound design point as well, because, like, the music leading up to that scene really sets it up, and then, like, Katie goes into detail to the point of, like, the turn signals on, and then you hear, like, the engine rev as they're, like, you're there, you're in the back seat, like, with this weird family, like, why am I here? I don't know, but I'm there because of, like, this was just created for me. I just think that was really cool.
It's so interesting listening to you talk about all this stuff, because I sort of recognise what you're saying as writers and performers. In retrospect, I think Mac, for me, she was kind of almost like a silhouette, like you saw her through everything else that was happening, but you couldn't actually see the core of her properly. And so when I was composing her, I wrote that really simple tune, which it was a bit depressed sounding, and a bit flat. And I had this idea, having read through the season, that obviously more energy would be injected as we went along, and but I wasn't quite sure how that was going to happen, because I didn't listen to how you did it. And, I only got the episodes one by one. So it was, I found it quite, I didn't find her very satisfying to compose for at that point, because there was...
Blah, blah.
It was blur. She kind of didn't have any music.
Nailed it.
Oh gosh.
But I liked using that bit of beatboxing I used because it sort of felt like it's like there's almost a voice there, but it's not. It's just air, you know. So there's a personality at the core of this music somewhere. I overthink everything. But yeah, absolutely. Sort of melding that with the surroundings of where they are was something I was doing intentionally as well, like trying to feed in like the drone in the music into the drone in the car and stuff like that. So like the inner world and the outer world were all kind of one thing. And we were sort of like trying to get in there into the sort of silhouette, into the blur.
Into the
Yeah. So I'm glad Steven's not around for me to ask this, but did you compose themes for specific characters? Do you have themes? Is Steven's like a 70s disco theme?
You
of
mean
By
some sort?
Steven, do you mean?
Steven Gogol.
Go.
So Alfie.
Yes.
All right, so Alfie and Nissa have joint music, which is that little sort of not very serious detective tune.
Yeah, I love it.
Music. Yeah, and that's probably the one, apart from Mac's tune, that's the one that gets developed the most actually, because they sort of go through. It started off being comical, but obviously they go through situations where you can't be comical. So I ended up doing quite a lot to it. Sort of episodes 9 and 10, where there's a lot of tense and anxious. They think their friend might be a murderer. And so it has to take quite a different tone. I was able to pick that up in the final episode actually, as well, as they were worrying about her. And yeah, when they go into all the magic stuff, I can sort of put all the little flutes in and stuff like that. Yes, it's really fun tune because you can sort of do quite a lot with it. Yeah.
So did you like for Mac and
Thomas.
no, Shaylee. There it is. For Mac and Shaylee, did they have their own tunes, their own themes?
They have a friendship tune, yeah.
So you gave them
Shelley has her own tune and Mac has her own tune, and they have a friendship tune.
Air quotes. There's air quotes flying around the table, just so you know.
Yeah. For those
Super
What?
friendly.
What does that mean? Yeah.
Okay,
Well, they do get on really well, though.
they do. They do.
Yeah,
They hit it off. But we're not there yet in episode 1.
No.
But back to episode 1 real quick. You did a lot of interesting work that sets up the rest of the season with episode 1. So you have, for instance, the piano playing in the music store.
Oh yeah.
That original song, and that kind of returns when you go back to the music store, which I love that song. And was that an original song that you wrote?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
It was so
Yeah, I think the only non-original thing in the whole of season 1 is the Claire de Lune in the funeral. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How about the murder?
And the murder.
That's a big sound
Yeah.
design thing.
And there's some sounds in that repeat later on in the season as well,
Yes.
with the big dogs.
I'm interested in how we get the sounds of those terrifying dogs.
I don't like to call them dogs. I just pretend they're something else. I know they're
Puppies?
dogs. No, like bears or something that I don't mind dying sometimes.
Katie,
Monster dogs.
So,
explain
Possums.
the monster dog noises.
so they're me.
There it is.
Yeah, I actually, when I knew I was going to come on this call and chat to you about this, I dug out the file of me doing the growls before I'd done the thing in the computer to make them sound like dogs.
Yes.
Play it.
It's quite, well, I don't know if I can play it over the Skype, but I'll send it to you. It's very embarrassing.
Play it, please.
I love it.
Patreon content.
Yeah, that's right.
Honestly,
Become a patron.
those top tier patrons
Absolutely.
get the raw footage of Katie growling.
Yeah.
That is some dedication.
So
right
so yeah.
there.
So what was your process for getting the sound of the monster dogs?
Well, I spent ages trying to record my friend's dogs, and it just didn't work. Chris very kindly told me one of them sounded like a sheep. It's, possibly the best bit of feedback I've had.
Friends. Ugh.
So in the end, I just did it myself. I made the noise that I thought they ought to make with my own voice. So you pitch them down, then add a bit of saturation in sort of the bass frequencies, which like it sort of brings out the harmonics. Like the the parts of the sound which are sort of higher, to sort of make it more penetrating, and then like fiddled around just like boosting certain frequencies, and then add a bit of compression, so like sort of made it more even and louder. I think that's basically what I did. I used a bass enhancer at one point, but I've basically had a bit of an argument with the supplier who makes that one, so I've sort of gone into a fit of pique and boycotted them now. So, yeah. Yeah, it's basically just making them bassier and more big sounding. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, this has come up a couple times now in what she said about direction, but I very frequently, this is my direction to everyone. Can we go darker? Like, actors, musicians, composer, doesn't matter. Can we try that, but like darker, like more sinister, more evil? That's a very frequent note that I give to basically everybody.
Yeah, the last year's been a journey. I started off being ever so subtle and eventually realised it was pointless.
Subtlety is not in my repertoire, so I wouldn't say the writing is subtle.
It gave me permission to do the fun that I wanted to do.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah, I like it.
Speaking of song, we have our theme song.
Oh yeah, the theme song. The theme song came to us from Michael Yates, a guitarist local to the area. He is a wonderful singer and guitar player and songwriter. He worked with us on the Unwritten musical. He wrote all the guitar parts for the songs as well as the entire song Omniscient, which Sean got to sing.
Guitar solo.
Sean, I found my music book from Unwritten while I was looking for my scripts. I was like, what is this? Oh my God, I found all our music. I should have brought it.
That is awesome. But yeah, so Michael wrote a song called Morning's End, and a portion of that song is our theme song, which he tailored to the show specifically. I told him that I wanted, based on where the origins of the folklore are from, a lot of that comes from Scandinavia, and we draw on those sort of influences in the narrative. And I thought that the sound of the show, especially the fact that it became this like big actiony show, wanted a kind of rock metal vibe. So I said, I want Scandinavian, like gothic Scandinavian metal, like Nightwish or one of those sorts of bands. And that's what he ran with that direction when he did it. So it's not just that we thought it would sound cool, it's that it actually has a component to it that matches elements of the story and fits in there. And so that's where he came up with that. And then Jordan and Michael sang it, and Michael did all of the instrumentation for it. So yeah, that's where we got the theme song. But it's also possible that going forward, that different seasons might try different theme songs that might match the content of that season. So it's possible that may happen in the future.
We're bringing back Omniscient.
Exactly, but that's really what we're doing. We're just bringing back Omniscient.
Go listen to Unwritten if you have no idea what we're talking about. It's absolutely worth it.
Yes, hearing Sean ad-lib very important lines in that song that were not in the original song.
You're never going to hear scones referred to in a heavy metal.
Yes.
Is that right?
I didn't even think about that.
Scones.
I thought that's why you made scones this morning.
Oh man, that's totally why I made scones. I also want to do a shout out to Jenny Hawley and David Senator, who played McKenna's parents and McKenna and Thomas's parents. What was really funny when David came in and was reading his lines, he's like, I die right at the end.
In my first scene.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
But you're gonna be in it more.
Yeah, we later on in the season we have some flashbacks, but he did such an amazing job, and Jenny did an amazing job, and it was a perfect end to the first episode.
Yeah. I mean, it's intentionally kind of shocking, and I like how brutal it ends up sounding with all the sound. It gets really brutal, and I don't want to shy away from that kind of stuff, because I like the intensity.
Yeah.
I like the dynamic intensity. So I like to kind of keep things subtle and chill, and then all of a sudden something really explosive and heavy. And yeah, that scene is really brutal.
In the script, the very last line is Paige Thorne, their mom. Her line is bloody gurgles. That is it. Yeah, subtle. I like it.
This is I told you I don't do subtle so much, but like I can take down the intensity a little bit and then I can raise it a little bit. Yeah, bloody gurgles, which are really fun to record. But
I can't think of a better way to end an episode.
You know what? If Katie's gonna put out her growling track, we might have to do our grunt track.
Oh man.
Oh,
Like-
yeah.
Clearly labeled.
like the fight track.
Yeah, the fight track.
The fight.
Track.
There's more air quotes happening right
Yeah.
yeah.
So I wanted to mention this before we finished up the first episode, just a little bit about our process and how we do this, because I know like there's always discussion in podcast groups, especially audio drama groups, about how do you make these things? How do people actually put them together? And what I've learned from looking at those is that a lot of shows, and I might want to say most shows, record everything remotely, where no one is ever in the same room and
At the same time.
At the same time, yeah. And the performers are all sending their solitary recordings, and sometimes they'll rehearse over Skype or whatever, but they're sending solitary recordings. And the director is maybe going back and saying, okay, try it again, but this way. And then they're kind of matching them together. And that's how a lot of them are made for logistical reasons. But when we made Unwritten, we decided that we wanted to really take advantage of the arts community in the city, which is why the company's called Dayton Writers Movement. So the arts community of Dayton. And we do nearly everything live. In the room with everyone together. So when we rehearse, everyone is around the table physically, and when we record, same thing. And it's very rare that we have anyone recorded out. Like in season 1, do we have anyone recorded out of the room?
Don't forget Katie's growls.
Yeah, I think Sammy.
Oh yes, Sammy the dog.
Yeah, Sammy, who plays Murphy. Yeah, we recorded him upstairs.
Right. He didn't rehearse with us.
Yeah.
But as far as human actors, I don't know that anyone was
Season
dropped
2, we
in.
had some.
Season 2, we have a couple very minor characters dropped in.
Yeah.
Was Sarah in the room?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She came down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Special recording.
Alder Neve, Sarah Amar lives 6 hours away ish.
Yep.
In Chicago, and actually came down for it.
Okay.
So yeah, we did that. We did all of her parts for season 1 in one night with Sean. But yeah, so that's kind of how we do that, by getting everybody together and recording it round table style. And it does make the editing a lot trickier, because you're constantly cutting different people's mics, and there's mic bleed, and you have to be very careful with everybody coordinating their page turns, so that like if someone turns a little early, the other mics are going to pick it up and it's going to ruin a line. So there's a lot of little things that you have to do that make it trickier to do that kind of recording. But at the same time, I think we get much better performances that way. And it seems like from the performers, and you can weigh in on this, that you're more comfortable being able to actually hear the person you're responding to and respond directly to them. In fact, not just hear them, but even look at them.
I don't know. I talked to Fetch at some point. That bitch is never in the room.
Kitschy. No, I enjoy the dynamic of having somebody to feed off of. And plus, it also helped, I think, with instant response. A couple of times you were like, oh, I was going to say it this way, but that comes out wrong. Let's try a different way right here, right now. The problem with reading a script solo is you read it and you develop the lines you're going to say based on what you think you're going to be fed from the other actors. But if they read their lines a different way and they feed it to you wrong, well, if you're not in the room with them, you can't adjust. But it's real easy. And just coming from a live theater background, I prefer having the chaos in the room and develop it on the fly.
It's a good point, especially the live theater. Also, we all grow in our relationships in real life as with our characters. Especially like the relationship between Nissa, Alfie, and Mac would not be as good as it is if I wasn't friends with Luna and Steven. So it's important to have that live action.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. And also, like, for those listeners who, you know, don't get to look into our rehearsal rooms, the other thing that Sean likes to do, and why I think he likes to rehearse live, is that he will just like kind of roam around the table as the storyteller, and then like just when everyone's kind of forgotten that he's there because they're in the midst of this scene, he'll like lean over their shoulder and say his line, you know, something about like how this is gonna die, right in Luna's ear. And every time she jumps and she's like, why are you doing that? But he just likes to do that and that obviously wouldn't be possible if we weren't
Maybe
rehearsing.
we shouldn't do that.
You're not rethinking the system.
Yeah. Let's just change everything.
But yeah, so we kind of do all of that together and try to have everything in the room and record it, you know, right there in that way to really capture those moments.
And not just the actors. We have the writers of the particular scripts to most degree, right? They're in the room with us when we're rehearsing, letting us know what they were thinking when there's, you know, gray area in the line, and that helps tremendously.
For the most part, we are able to do that, yeah, because
Or we're texting our writers, hey,
Yeah.
what did you mean
That's
by
right.
this?
right, that we do that sometimes. Well, I mean, I write a lot of the episodes. Megan writes some. Stephen Kallenberg, who plays Thomas, writes some, and then the other writers we haven't necessarily been able to have always in the room. Cari, did you ever come to any of the rehearsals?
No,
Oh,
bad.
you did.
Bad
You're
participant.
not a bad participant. And
Alexa came
then
to
our
one.
other writer who writes a lot of the episodes is Alexa Fisher, and she has come to a couple of the rehearsals, but she was always remote. She was working from another state, and now, as we're still working on the show, is working from Japan, so where she now lives. So she's very remote, so she isn't coming to rehearsals, unfortunately. But
You really can't live text her either because it's probably the middle of the night where she is.
yeah, when we're rehearsing, it's actually like midday because we're rehearsing usually in the evenings.
Oh.
So it's like she's at work
Yep.
the next day in the future because she works from the future. So she's in the future and at work.
Did
while
we
we're
mention
doing
she's
that.
in the future? Or
Trying to be clever.
Push for Patreon. If we get more patrons, we can maybe get some flights out for Katie
Is that
and
what?
Alexa.
Okay, there we go.
Yes,
Oh.
yes.
There we go.
Patreon goals.
You have to put another stretch goal on there.
Yes. So yeah, so that's kind of that system and how we put all of that together. I know that Megan, you had brought something up that prompted that. Now I don't remember what it was, but it doesn't matter.
Just talking about the process.
Yeah, I don't mean just talking about the process, but at any rate, that's kind of how all of that fits together and how we work it. So obviously, I'm biased to the way that we do it, but I do think that despite some of the extra headaches that you get, that the benefit to the performances is worth trying to get everybody together if that's possible. And we're just very lucky to be in a city where we have a really vibrant arts community and we have a lot of super talented people that are willing to put the time into a project like this. And I mean, it is a lot of time, especially like other shows have like 9 episode seasons and we're dumb and do 22 episode seasons. So we spend a lot of time
Ambitious.
putting it together.
There it is.
Ambitious.
Ambitious. Okay. That sounds a lot nicer than dumb. Yeah. But anyway, is there anything else anybody wanted to mention about episode 1?
Just thank you to everyone who listened to season 1 and kept listening. Okay, because like we said, Mac, for example, is blah.
It takes.
You have to be driven to listen to everything and just realize it's all there for a reason, and it only makes the reveals that much better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Everything really is there for a reason. Even things that like we still hear, the occasional feedback of, well, but this part isn't necessary or this is unnecessary. And it's like, trust me, we are in it for the long game. Like we are playing the long game. We have already written season 2. So when someone listens to the first couple episodes and they're like, I just don't know, why you do this. It's like, okay, you might know it by the end of the season 1. You might not know it until the end of season 2, but you will know
or
everything.
Even season 3.
Yeah, that's true. Even maybe season 3. Everything, even weird choices that might seem odd, has a reason for existing. Like we use a narrator not because we think it's cool to just have, spooky commentary. Although that's fun, but we use a narrator because we can't do the action scenes that are coming later, these big fight scenes, without the narrator, because just a bunch of clanging and grunting isn't gonna sound right, and it's gonna be super boring. But with the narrator being able to pop in and give you bits of the action, it's really exciting. But you don't know that because the show for 11 episodes does not sound like it's going to ever have a fight scene in it. It's just not that kind of show.
It's so blah.
It's not. You're right.
We're going to kill people still.
Right. Well, we'll kill people, but we're not going to have like sword fights. But we knew that, obviously. Yeah. So having a narrator be able to, talk through the action was really important to us. And a lot of other little choices. So a lot of things are done for a reason that we just haven't necessarily revealed yet because, that's out there.
True.
They're coming. The reasons are coming.
Oh, the reasons are coming. Any other favorite moments from season?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is everybody's favorite moments from episode 1? Favorite part, moment, line.
I have a favorite line. As opposed to your parents' deliberate plan of having you at 17.
Which one? Both?
Yes.
You say it twice.
I think the repetition of that is what really drives it home.
I love when Mackenna and Thomas are talking to each other and he's trying to convince her to call her friends to let them know. And then she's like, okay, I'll text them. And that just like cracks me up. And then he's like, no. But that part, okay, I'll text him, was such a well-delivered line by Mackenna.
Do you have one?
I love to be on the spot. I don't have any particular one. In episode 2, I do.
Oh,
okay.
No, it's actually episode 14.
Oh, okay.
14. Wait for it.
I have 2. One is the mirror scene where Max sees Fack in the mirror. Our fearless leader, Christopher, doesn't like to be on the podcast ever and claims that he never is. But guess what? That sound is partially you, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe a little me. I'm not sure if I've been there. It is both of us?
The scream that happens at the end. Because I don't even know, it might have even been written in the script, but it was supposed to start really low and then go really high. And you get the high part really well. Like the height of your scream is piercing.
Here's what it says. Scream that starts low and quiet and rises rapidly in pitch and volume. Yup.
Yeah. So, but when you were doing it, Dan was like, try to go lower. And you were doing as low as you can, but Jordan's a soprano. Yeah. So, yes. And this was done, I believe, if I remember correctly, this was recorded after everyone else had gone home.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm pretty sure the only people still in the whole place were Megan and I and you and Dan.
Yeah, and part of it was because I didn't want to scream before recording and ruin my voice.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was the very last thing we did. Everybody else had gone home. Mm-hmm. No one else in the room could even do it. And then everyone looked at me and they were like, well, maybe you could start it low and go up as high as you can. And then Dan would like merge them. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I kind of did that grudge, like
creaking
voice. Yeah.
It was really cool.
So I am in there.
It sounded really good.
I know, and he went uncredited. He refused to be credited for that.
That's a sound effect. That's not even an also starring.
I feel like it is.
We credit everyone. Come on.
Sammy gets credit.
Sammy gets credit in season 2. Unfortunately, we didn't think to credit Sammy in season 1.
Such a tragic loss.
Yeah.
I know, it really is.
Sammy. Sammy was great in season 1 as well.
He was. He was.
We'll when we get to that episode, we'll talk about Sammy's process.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very good process. Do you have a favorite moment?
Did you do both?
Did I say 2?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Two.
I did say 2. I love when they're in the car and he says they were murdered. And I said it before about how she's like, I just saw them last night, you liar. What is it? Hold on. Give me a second. I just love. Thomas goes, they're gone, Mackenna. Someone. They were killed. Max, like, killed. Like a car accident or something. Like, does not care. Okay. So what? And just like Sean said about how you got angry, kind of. I would be too. Can you imagine being Thomas? And he just like is like, no, like murdered, you idiot. But he doesn't say you idiot. He's just, no. Oh, did you not understand? I'm sorry. Like, Thomas almost apologizes because he thinks Mac is just so in denial she's not getting it. No, Mac just doesn't care. I love it. It was fun.
I would say that my favorite part is the first little bit of foreshadowing that there is a larger plan unfolding at the highest level of the story, which for me comes when the storyteller says that if Mackenna gets any more upset during this police interview, things are going to go badly. Mm-hmm. And miraculously, right then, Sam's phone rings. And it's just a hint that there is something larger unfolding. So I think that part's a lot of fun.
Man, and if that's so subtle, if you don't catch it, you'll go right by.
Yeah, it almost just seems
So
convenient.
Yes.
And maybe it is just convenient.
But
I do really like that.
years old when I learned that was a thing.
Yeah.
Everyone,
Cool.
Jordan Lopez, producer
You
and star of the show.
Probably was told at some point. Forgot.
Yes.
It is super subtle. Very, very subtle.
It's really subtle, yeah.
So Katie, do you have a favorite part?
Yeah, I was just thinking through. I've scrolled through my script. I really like the bit where they're driving back from the police station, and then the fetch shows up in the car window. I like both ends of that. It's all done by the storyteller. I like both ends of that monologue. Like the little bit about Thomas, I just found really poignant when he says, "You need to respect his ability to hold on to cultural enforcement of masculinity." That bit, I was like, Thomas. And that was the first time that I'd sort of defied the script and underscored something which I'd not been told to underscore. And that was because I was like, oh, bless him. He needs a bit of music. And then later on in the scene when it gets creepy as well, that's really cool. You know, it's just perfect sort of creepy fantasy stuff. You know, it's like, what's that? Is it even there? You know, I really love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and if people are like, yeah, but how is that possible? How could the fetch do that? Look, yet another thing that has a reason that we just haven't gotten to yet.
Boom.
But it's coming. It really is.
Yep. So before we wrap this up, there's a place that a bunch of the fans are meeting on the web called
Discord. Yes. So yeah, you can, if you follow us on Twitter at DWM Presents, we have links to our Discord where fans can go and chat. We have very interesting and lively discussions on there. And a lot of the producers and stars are on there as well. So you can chat with them. Yeah, we do have a good Discord community.
Yeah. And if you have more questions on episode 1, definitely bring those questions there.
Yes.
And we'll be sure to answer them.
There's an entire channel where you can ask cast and crew questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bonus points if you come up with a themed name from the show for
Oh,
your
yes.
username.
Should
Yes.
we say our
Yeah.
theme names?
Yeah, totally.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Mine's Bathroom Girl.
And why is that?
that'll become a lot more apparent if you listen to our next commentary episode or just the next episode of the show.
Yeah. I don't have a theme name. Sorry.
It's just your name.
Yeah, it's just Meg Burnside, I think.
I think we should put it up for vote. What genre the next episode theme music should be? Appalachian banjo. Yeah. Oh, Jordan's on board with that.
Yeah.
I'm so close to quitting, Sean. It's like so close. What's your name?
I am not on there, so feel free to
Get 'em
make
there.
fun of
Boo.
soon, though.
Okay, you're on there.
Soon.
What are you?
I'm Fac on the Discord,
Yeah.
not Mac.
Back.
I'm the Magister.
Dork.
Occasionally, I go in character.
Oh, yes.
I did not play the Magister. Let's make that very clear.
Katie?
I'm just Katie.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Like we said at the beginning, if you want to hear the entire series of commentary episodes, which we'll have for all the episodes of season 1, you can find those on Patreon. And that's where you'll find us next. And season 2 is on its way. So you'll be seeing that at some point in the future.